Most people spend their entire lives becoming decent at many things. There is a specific kind of man who makes a different choice. He picks one thing, and he gives it everything. Not for a season, not for a year, for decades. And the world almost never understands why. We call these men obsessive. We call them single-minded, sometimes difficult, often impossible to fully know. We admire what they produce, but quietly wonder what is wrong with them. Why would anyone sacrifice so much for one thing? Why not diversify, explore, keep options open like everyone else? But this video isn't really about dedication. It never was. It's about something that runs much deeper. A psychological pattern that forms early, shapes everything, and almost never gets examined honestly. Because the men who spend years perfecting one thing are not simply disciplined. They are driven by something they may not even have a name for. There's a particular quality to the way these men relate to their craft. It is not casual. It is not even passionate in the way most people use that word. It is closer to a conversation, one that started years ago and has never fully ended. The craft speaks to them in a language no one else can quite hear, and walking away from it, even temporarily, feels less like rest and more like going silent in the middle of a sentence. What is interesting is not the dedication itself. What is interesting is that these men almost never chose this. They did not sit down one day and decide to spend the next 20 years becoming exceptional at one thing. It happened differently, gradually, almost inevitably, the way a river finds its path, not by choosing, but by following the shape of the ground beneath it. Something called to them early. A sound, a movement, a system, a material, and something in them responded in a way that nothing else quite matched. That response, that specific aliveness, became the thing they kept returning to. First out of curiosity, then out of habit, then out of identity, until the line between the man and the thing he does became very difficult to find. Psychologists who study expertise use a concept called deliberate practice, the idea that what separates exceptional performers from merely good ones is not raw talent, but the sustained, focused repetition of specific skills over thousands of hours. But what this research rarely addresses is the psychological question underneath the behavioral one. Why do some people keep going when others stop? What makes a man return to the same thing, day after day, decade after decade, long after the novelty is gone, and long after anyone would blame him for moving on? The answer, in most cases, is not willpower. It is not even passion in the conventional sense. It is something closer to recognition. The feeling that this thing, this specific pursuit, reflects something true about who he is, not what he does. Who he is. This isn't really about the craft. It never was. It is about the self that only becomes visible through the craft. This is why these men are so difficult to pull away from their work. It is not stubbornness. It is not poor work-life balance. It is that the work is not separate from the life. It is the axis around which the life turns. Remove it, and nothing quite makes sense in the same way. The days feel shapeless. The hours feel unearned. There is a version of himself that only exists in relation to the thing he is building. And without the building, that version goes quiet. Ask one of these men what he would do if he could no longer practice his craft and watch what happens to his face. Not sadness, exactly. Something more fundamental than sadness. The expression of someone who has been asked to imagine being a different person entirely. What the outside world sees is the output, the finished work, the accumulated skill, the results of 10,000 hours. What it rarely sees is what happens in the middle, the years where the progress is invisible, where the gap between what he can currently do and what he knows it should be is so wide, it is almost insulting. Where every other reasonable person would have concluded that enough is enough and found something easier to love. These are the years that define these men more than any achievement, because it is easy to commit when things are going well, The real psychological signature of someone who has chosen one thing for life is what they do when the work is not working, when the results are not coming, when the voice that says this is pointless grows louder than the one that says, keep going. And almost without exception, these men keep going. Not because they are immune to doubt, but because the doubt, for them, is simply part of the conversation, part of the long, slow, unfinished dialogue between the man and the thing he has chosen to spend his life on. Here is the part that is worth sitting with. The men who dedicate decades to perfecting one thing often arrive at a strange and unexpected place. They become, by any objective measure, exceptional. And in that exceptionalism, they find themselves more alone than they expected, not because people don't respect them, but because there are very few people who can fully meet them in the place where they live. The craft creates a kind of altitude, and altitude is isolating. The view is extraordinary, but the air is thin, and most people don't stay long at that elevation. They visit, they admire, and then they return to lower ground where breathing is easier. And the man who has built his life up there watches them go and feels something he cannot always name, a mixture of pride and a very particular kind of loneliness that has no clean solution, because the answer is not to come down. Coming down would mean becoming someone else. And that is not a trade he is willing to make. There is something quietly profound about a man who spends years, real years, not months, becoming deeply good at one thing, not because the world asked him to, not because it made financial sense, not because anyone was watching, but because somewhere early in his life, something called to him, and he answered. And he has been answering ever since. The world moves fast and wide. It rewards versatility and punishes depth. Now, it celebrates the person who can do many things adequately, far more loudly, than the one who can do one thing extraordinarily. But these men are not interested in that trade. They never were. And maybe the question worth asking, quietly without judgment, is not why they are the way they are. Maybe the question is what you gave up when you decided not to be.